Hi friends, welcome to WafaStudies YouTube channel. This is part 103 in Azure Data Factory playlist. In this video, we are going to discuss about CDC, that is Change Data Capture for SQL Table in Mapping Data Flows. So firstly, we have to understand what is CDC or what is change data capture means actually. So let me explain you this theoretically for 1 minute. So CDC is nothing but like change data capture. Okay. So that means whatever the changed data it is there in your table, or it can be a file also. So from there you want to take only that changes and load it into your destination. So that is called CDC, change data capture. In this video, we are going to take SQL table as a source basically. Okay. So let's assume I have a table here. This is source table. Let's assume here I have ID 1, 2. Now let's assume this is my destination table. So in the initial load, it should take both these columns like ID 1 and 2. And then after some time, let's assume another row inserted here like id 3. Then in the next run it should take only this row and it should insert into my sync. Okay. And after that some time, maybe this id2 data got updated here, some update happened here. So in the next run it will take only that updated data into the destination table. So whatever the data it's changed, that data only we need to capture. So that's the reason we will call it like change data capture. Okay, only changed data we should take it and load it into my destination tables or files, whatever it is, right? So now uh, this is similar to incremental load actually. So we have discussed a few incremental video data related videos, right, in our previous, also in our data factory real-time scenarios playlist. So similar to that. So before, what we need to do is in our past, right, we have to rely on some column. So people used to do in real time, there is something called a watermark column. They will keep one column called watermark column. They will see that column data to identify whether that particular row is new row or old row, updated row. We have discussed about yes, type 1, type 2, type 3 videos also in our real time scenarios playlist. So all that manually implemented the CDC part. But this video we are going to explore a inbuilt feature of CDC which is present in the mapping data flows. So not only in mapping data flows, usually at a pipeline level also, now they announced something called CDC resource actually. So that we will discuss in our upcoming videos. So now we are going to discuss about this CDC from the data flows. Okay. So let me practically show you this so that you will make more sense of it. So let's go back to presentation. So before you use your SQL table as a source, you need to make sure CDC is enabled on that SQL database and table. So why we need to do it is the data flow, how it works is, if I go back, so let's assume when you enable that CDC from your data flows, it is going to, so how your system will know what data inserted, what data deleted, it is going to rely on the SQL Server CDC. In SQL Server, let's assume you have a table, and let's assume this is like a DB1. Okay, and this is like a table 1, T1. So in SQL Server, whenever any changes happens on any table, it can be insert, it can be update, it can be delete. All the changes can be tracked by SQL Server very easily if you enable something called CDC on the database and on the table. Okay, so in SQL Server you have that native feature. So if you have that, what this CDC will do, whatever the changes happen on that table, it is going to log them, and also it is going to create lot of CDT related tables and objects and table valued functions. Using that, it is going to maintain the information, what data inserted, what data updated, what data deleted, everything. So since the SQL Server has that native CDC capability in data flows, we are going to use the same native CDC capability of our SQL source, and we are going to implement the CDC. Okay, and this is the best way to implement the CDC. If your source has the capability of CDC, then make use of it. enable it, and then try to use the same in Data Factory so that you can see a smooth execution of your CDC changes. When I practically show you this, it will make more sense of it if it is not making sense now. So let's go back to presentation. Let's go back to SQL Server Management Studio. Here I have two tables. You can see there is something called citizens table and there is something called citizens DW table. So let's assume this citizens table is my source table, and I am going to take this citizens DW table as my sync table. In real time, your sync or destination table will be some other table in some other SQL data server, or it may be a delta table, right? Whatever it is. For simplicity, I used the same SQL database, and I created another table there as a destination. Okay. So let me try to show you what data we have right now in that source table, that is citizens table. So let me try to take this citizens table here and execute a select query on top of it. Now when I execute, I can clearly see here I have two columns, id and name. I have only two rows. This is first row and this is second row. And if I show you the columns in this citizens table, you can see there are two columns. Okay, one is id column which is primary key, and another one is name column which is a string type. So this is my source table. Now let me explain you my sync table also, the destination table. This is citizens dw table, and here also I have two columns, id and name column. So this is my sync table. So right now let's try to execute a select query on top of my city sync table as well, that is citizens dw column, sorry, citizens dw table. So right now my destination table has no data. You can see here clearly, right? It has no data. Okay, so now let me do one thing. Let me create a data flow that will take all the data from the citizens table and load it here. And after that, whatever the changes happens here, it should automatically take only that changes into my destination table. So let me go to my data factory, and here let me try to create a new data flow, and let's add a source transformation here. And under source transformation, I am going to create a new data set here, and my data set is going to be SQL type. So Azure SQL database connector I am using it here, and I already created a linked service, and let me name it like citizens. This is the dataset name, and let me select the citizens table here, and let me click OK to create this dataset. And whatever the dataset we created, the same dataset got selected under source settings. I can go to projection. I can see my name and ID, name and ID columns here. Let's go to source options under source transformation. You can see there is something called change data capture. So when I check this, it says you want to take the SQL Server CDC, that means native enabled capability of the SQL Server, or you want to do incremental column. So that means your table should have one column. Depending upon that column data, you will identify whether it is a new row or old row, right? So you do all that logic. So as I said, recommended way is rely on the native capability which your source system is allowing. So let me select this SQL Server CDC, and what I want to do here, I want to take the full data in the first run, and then from the second run take only the changes. So I selected that as well. But remember what we did, we only created tables here. We have not enabled any CDC on this source table yet. So remember that we have to enable it. If we don't enable it, we are going to end up with an issue. Let me go to data preview. Let me refresh here under source transformation to make sure we are getting our source data here correctly or not. See, the moment I executed, it is giving me an error. It says there is no CDC enabled actually. So this kind of error will come when you are using a CDC here, but you have not enabled that CDC capability on the table. So let's first go and do that. So to enable CDC, the hierarchy will be first we have to enable CDC on a database, and then we have to enable the CDC on the table. So let me practically show you that. So firstly, let's execute a select query from system.databases. There is a system table called databases, and from there I am taking name column, and also I am taking, there is something called is CDC enabled column. Let me execute this, and when I execute and when I see the results here, you can clearly see there are two databases, master and this is my database, and for both the columns, for both the rows, CDC enabled is 0. That means CDC is not enabled. So firstly we have to enable the CDC. So how to enable it? For that we have to execute a system stored procedure. Let me go to presentation. Here I have mentioned it. SP underscore CDC underscore enable DB. This will help you to enable CDC on the database. So let's try to use that SP underscore CDC underscore enable DB. Okay. Then finally, let's try to execute this query here. So selected it, executed it. The moment you execute this query, what it will do, it is going to enable the CDC on the database, and also it is going to create some CDC related objects. It can be tables, it can be table valued functions. A lot of things will happen behind the scenes. I can create a separate video to explain about SQL Server CDC capability. But for now, you have an idea that CDC, once you enable on a database and table, it will create lot of supportive objects so that it can keep track of what changes are happening. Because of that capability only, our data flow can able to understand what are the changes happen, and it can pull only that changes to your destination. So now we have enabled CDC at database level. Now we have to let me execute this query once again to make sure whether CDC enabled or not. You can see here CDC is enabled for my database successfully. So now what I am going to do, I have to enable the CDC for my table. Before that, let me execute another query from system.tables system table. Here I can take table name, and there is something called is tracked by CDC column. So let me execute this. It is going to give you all the tables. You can see here it is going to give you all the tables along with this column is tracked by CDC or not. You can see there are so many tables. There is my citizens table as well, but CDC is not enabled for that table. So I have to enable it. So for that, what I will be doing it here is I will be executing another system stored procedure sp underscore cdc underscore enable table. Okay, and then here this table expects this source schema parameter is mandatory. So let me supply that underscore source schema. So what is the schema of your table that you have to supply? So my table schema is dbo. You can see it, right? It is dbo dot citizens. Okay, then you can see there is still one error. There is another parameter called source name. So source name is going to be your table name. So let me pass that as well. Source underscore name equals to what is my table name? Citizens. Okay, and then you can see another parameter called role name, that is also mandatory. So let's pass value for this role name parameter, and for now I am going to pass null here. Okay, and lastly there is another parameter called uh, net changes, supports net changes. So even this parameter should supply, then only CDC can track the changes, whatever net changes happening. With this net changes capability only, your data flow can understand what are the changes happen. So what I can do here, I can pass this supports net underscore changes equals to 1. So once I framed my SQL query, let me execute this to enable CDC on top of the citizens table. So let me hit execute to run this. My command executed successfully. Now if I execute this query, I should see CDC enabled for my citizens table. Let me show you that here. So now let me select here. You can see CDC enabled for my citizens table. Not only that, it created, there is one more table like this, right? So what is this table? This is created because of that CDC enabled on top of this particular table. So these tables will hold all the tracks, I mean whatever the changes happen, it will track everything. Okay, so let's not go deep into the understanding the CDC concept from SQL Server level. So for now you can get a sense that now we have enabled CDC, and now if I see my source table, I have two rows, that is one is Mahir and second one is Mahir, and if I see my sync table, I don't have any data. So now let's go back to our data flow. Under data preview, now let's try to refresh and see whether this error will go or not. You can see now I am able to successfully preview my changes. Why? Because since I enabled CDC now, my data flow is not giving any error, even though I used this CDC capability here. So my source is good now. So now let's try to configure my sync, in which my data should be moved, all the changed data should be moved. So here under sync, let's try to create a new data set. So I am going to use the same SQL database, different table. So I am using the same connector. So let me say like citizens DW. This is the table name and this is the database name. And here let's select my citizens DW table from this table name dropdown. And if you see here, it is giving you a lot of CDC related tables here, right? All this is because of that CDC thing what I enabled. All these tables or objects actually help my SQL server to maintain the changed data details, so that any system, in my case my data flow, when it tries to query, it will make use of all these CDC related objects to understand what changes happened, and the same changes will be moved to your destination. So let's not worry about all these tables here. Let's select my sync table. This is my sync table where I want my sync source data to go. Let me hit OK to create this data set here. Now let's go to sync settings. Make sure you allow all inserts, deletes, update and upserts and everything. And key column, make sure you select a proper key column. The primary key column on which we are making all the changes, select that key column. That is very important here. Okay, so now that's it. We are done with our implementation. Now what I can do, I can create a new pipeline here. Let me create a new pipeline, and in this new pipeline let me drag and drop this data flow here. So what I am doing it here, I created a new pipeline called pipeline 1, and in the data flow activity you can see it selected my data flow whatever I created here, and also you can see there is something called checkpoint key. So this checkpoint key actually help the data flow to keep the checkpoint for the previous executions, and then from there check what are the differences happened in your source and take those differences or changes actually. This checkpoint is actually a auto-generated GUID. It's a alphanumerical number. You no need to worry anything about it. It will take care of it. It will automatically add this ID here, checkpoint key here. If you want to change it, if you want to keep your own key, you can do that. You can also override this key by adding some dynamic content also. It is up to you. So mostly it will be not needed to do any changes here. Let's use the checkpoint key, whatever my data flow using it here. Now let's try to execute this data flow in debug mode. So now what it should happen is, as we are expecting, first run it should do the full run. If you see under source option, we said full on the first run and then incremental. So right now my sync table has empty data, no data. So it should take full data from my source and load it into my sync. So let's wait for my data flow execution to complete here. Once the data flow execution completes, we will see whether that full run happened or not. After that, we will try to perform some inserts, updates and deletes and see whether that changes are reflecting in my sync table or not. Okay, my data flow execution completed here. Now I can even click this binocular symbol there and go to the pipeline runs. Inside the pipeline runs, inside the data flow activity under sync, I can see how many rows it read or written. So everything I can see. Let's not worry that. Let's go to my pipeline here and let's go to my SQL Server Management Studio. Let me execute a select query on top of my this citizens data warehouse table. So let me hit this execute button. Now if you can see, I am able to see two rows came into my sync table, right? It was successfully able to get the two rows here. So let me do one thing. So in my sink now I have two rows, that is fine. But what if there is any changes happened on my source table? So let's try to insert one row into my source table. Insert into DBO citizens values. So let's try to insert a third row with ID 3 and name ASI. Okay. So insert into, okay. So here I have to close this. Let me execute this query. One row inserted. Now if I execute select query on top of my source, you can see here I got three rows here. I got this third row. Okay. So now this row should go to my sync table as well. Right now if I see my sync table, it has only two rows. You can see here clearly it has only two rows. Now let's try to go to my data flow and let's try to re-execute this data flow, and this time let's see whether that newly inserted row alone came or not. So let's wait for the execution to complete. If you remember, when we see the execution of this data flow before, it has two rows calculated. Why? Because it's the first run, two rows moved from source to sink. This time it should calculate only one row, because CDC means it should take only the changes. It should not take the entire data. So only one row inserted, that means only one change happened. Only that row should be read and it should be moved to your sink. So let's see whether that will happen or not. Right now my data flow is running. This is a second execution. So it should sense the changes only. So you can see once the execution completes, we can monitor the same actually. It seems my execution completed. Let me hit this binocular symbol, the specs symbol there. And now let's wait for the data flow to open here in the monitor mode. Let me click this sync. You can see it is calculated only one row. And now if I go to SQL Server Management Studio, if I execute select query on top of my sync table, you can see here I have now three rows. Even the third row came. Right? How it came? Because of that CDC magic. So the data flow now able to sense the changed data, and it is able to pass that changed data only to sync system. So now what I will be doing it here is I will try to update some row. So let me do one thing. Update dbo dot citizens set name column value equals to Mahir Basha, where id equals to 1. So previously wherever the id is 1, there we have name as Mahir, but now I want that to be like Mahir Basha. So let me execute this query to update my source table. My source table updated. Let me execute a select query here, and now I can see in my source table I have id1 as Mahir Basha actually. So now what I will be doing it here is I will be running my data flow once again, and let's see whether only that first row will get updated in my sync or not. So let me hit this debug execute button to execute this data flow once again, and this time it should take only one row again, because only one row got affected, and that row is id 1 row, and the value is changed from Mahir to Mahir Basha. Let's wait for the data flow execution to complete here and then monitor further changes there. My data flow executed successfully. Let's go to SQL Server Management Studio and let me execute this sync table select query. You can clearly see now the ID 1 here became Mahir Basha, right? That means the changed data is able to capture. Now what I will be doing, I will be deleting one row. Delete dbo dot citizens table where ID equals to 1. So let's delete the first row from my table. I deleted it. Let me execute a select query. Now I have only two rows, that is id2 and id3. Now if I execute data flow even from my sync table, that means this table, it should delete this id row. You can see in the sync table it has id1 still, so it should get deleted automatically. So what I will be doing it here now. Now let's go to my data flow. Let me hit this debug executor button once again to execute this data flow. So here I am doing manual executions of my data flow. In real time, you can set a trigger on top of this data flow that can run for every 5 minutes or every 15 minutes or half an hour, depending upon your use case and requirement. Okay. In my data factory playlist, I have discussed about what is trigger, what kind of triggers we are have, and how to set the triggers. Everything we have discussed. So please watch them if you don't know what is trigger and how to set them. So it is only for CDC demo. I'm not doing any trigger here. I'm executing debug executions. So let's wait for this debug data flow execution to complete here now. My data flow execution completed. Let's go here. My sync table, you can, as I said just now, it has 3 rows now. But as I said, this first row should get deleted because in the source, that's what the change happened. So let me execute select query on top of my sync table now. You can clearly see now id1 got deleted, only we have id2 and 3. That means it is able to sense the changes from the source and it is able to delete the same changes from my sync as well. Not only delete, we have seen update, we have seen insert too. So this is how inside data flow, especially when you are using a SQL, you can make use of native CDC capability, and you can select accordingly the source options here, and you can make sure your data moves whenever it changes from source to sync. I hope you got an idea. Not only this, there is this feature also now. Whatever you are seeing here, right? Change data capture preview. This is exactly same thing. Here we no need to even create a data flow actually. We can directly create work with the same CDC even here actually. That we will demonstrate in our upcoming videos. So I hope you got an idea. Let's go to presentation. So these are the two main things to remember: how to enable CDC for database and how to enable CDC for table. And then in the data flow, use the CDC feature and make sure your changes moved from your source to sync. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon to get the notifications whenever I add videos. Thank you so much.